Welcome back, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this special edition of The Explainer. Today, we are embarking on a cinematic, documentary-style journey through the deadliest and most transformative conflict in human history, World War II. We're going to break down the timeline, the sweeping strategies, and the sheer global scale of this massive event, making this incredibly complex history crisp and clear.
Okay, let's dive into this. It really is the ultimate historical mystery, right? How does a fragile peace just collapse into a global inferno? I mean, the world had barely survived the war to end all wars, yet literally 2 decades later, the whole globe is on fire again. To understand the sheer scale of the devastation that followed, we really have to look at the cracks in that shattered foundation.
Part 1. The World on the Brink and the Axis Expansion.
The dominoes actually started falling way back in 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles. It basically strapped crushing penalties onto a defeated Germany. Fast forward to the 1930s, and the global economy completely tanks, creating this desperate, super volatile environment. And that kind of absolute despair, that's exactly what paved the way for Adolf Hitler and the terrifying centralization of the Third Reich. Finally, in 1939, after years of aggressive boundary pushing, Europe is pushed right over the edge with Germany's sudden invasion of Poland.
And once this war started, it moved with just unprecedented ferocity. We're talking about the Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. It was basically a 3-part nightmare. A paralyzing surprise invasion, instantly followed by rapid, armored advances that blew right past traditional defenses, all while overwhelming, coordinated air support rained down from above. These violently efficient tactics left the Allies completely reeling and essentially forced Britain and France to officially declare war.
Honestly, the speed of it was staggering. Under the weight of these new tactics, entire nations collapsed in rapid succession. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and ultimately France, they all just fell before the overwhelming military momentum of the Third Reich, as it essentially swallowed the European continent whole.
But then, that momentum hits a wall, literally, in the skies over Britain. Inspired by Winston Churchill's legendary defiance, the heavily outnumbered Royal Air Force just dug in. The Luftwaffe attacks, but the RAF resistance holds firm. That bitter, desperate struggle in the clouds actually stopped a massive ground invasion. For the very first time, it proved that the Axis war machine could actually be stalled.
Now, to really see how global this gets, look at these 2 massive events happening concurrently. Over in the freezing east, Operation Barbarossa, which was Germany's massive betrayal and invasion of the Soviet Union, ultimately bogs down in the brutal, unforgiving realities of the Russian winter. Meanwhile, halfway across the planet in the Pacific, Admiral Yamamoto's strategic planning becomes a terrifying reality with the shocking December 7th surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor.
Part 2. The Turning of the Tide.
Right, so after the absolute tragedy of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. enters the war and immediately mobilizes its massive population. This leads directly to monumental turning points at the battles of Midway and Guadalcanal, violently halting the Japanese expansion. Once that line held, the Allies kicked off the island-hopping campaign. And let me tell you, it was a grueling, deadly strategy, slowly and methodically reclaiming the Pacific, island by bloody island.
Back in the West, that terrifying myth of Axis invincibility gets permanently shattered in 2 totally different environments. Down in the sweeping deserts of North Africa, British General Montgomery finally outmaneuvers Rommel at El Alamein. At the exact same time, in the freezing, absolute nightmare of urban warfare at Stalingrad, fierce Soviet resistance totally consumes and destroys a massive German army. Between the rubble of Stalingrad and the sands of North Africa, the tide had officially turned. Look, at the end of the day, modern wars are won by logistics. The Allied resurgence wasn't just about bravery on the battlefield, it was heavily fueled by relentless strategic bombing campaigns and the absolutely untouchable industrial power of the United States. American factories basically became the arsenal of democracy, systematically crushing the Axis forces with an unending, overwhelming volume of material. You simply can't fight a factory that never sleeps.
Part 3. The Fall of the Third Reich.
The long-awaited return to Western Europe kicks off with D-Day. I mean, just imagine the terrifying, monumental task of breaching Hitler's heavily fortified Atlantic Wall. The sheer brutality of the landings at Omaha Beach during the massive Normandy invasion is hard to overstate. But that incredible, bloody sacrifice actually worked. It cracked Fortress Europe wide open, setting off a chain of events that led directly to the joyous, historic liberation of Paris.
By late 1944, things are unraveling fast for Germany.
A massive Soviet offensive is relentlessly pushing west, grinding the German army to dust. Come early 1945, the capital city of Berlin is completely surrounded. That spring devolved into claustrophobic, vicious street-to-street fighting in the smoking ruins of the city. And of course, by May 1945, it all lands in Hitler's bunker, resulting in total Soviet victory and the absolute collapse of the Nazi regime.
Part 4. The Atomic Age and Japan's Surrenders.
Now we reach a permanent, irreversible turning point in human history. And it all happened in absolute secret. The top-secret Manhattan Project successfully develops the first nuclear weapons, violently dragging the world into the atomic age. This wasn't just a bigger bomb, you guys. It was a fundamental shift that completely altered the existential stakes and the very nature of modern warfare forever.
The timeline of those final days is incredibly rapid and devastating. August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb levels the city of Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, August 9th, a second falls on Nagasaki. Faced with this completely unprecedented level of absolute destruction, on August 15th, the Japanese emperor officially announces his nation's unconditional surrender.
It was an unprecedented radio broadcast. The general public was hearing the emperor's voice for the very first time. And with that single, historic transmission, the deadliest conflict in human history came to an absolute end. After years of unending global slaughter, the guns were finally silenced.
Part 5. The Legacy of the War and a Changed World.
Over 75 million. Let that number sink in for a second. Tens of millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives. We're talking about entire cities erased from the map, populations displaced across entire continents, and humanity witnessing the absolute darkest depths of atrocity. The true human cost here is honestly almost too vast to comprehend. It's a solemn, tragic legacy that profoundly shaped every single generation that followed. And from the literal ashes of all that destruction, a completely new world order emerged. We see the establishment of the United Nations, which was specifically designed to stop a global tragedy like this from ever happening again. But at the exact same time, we see the immediate dawn of the Cold War between these massive new superpowers. All while a completely shattered, exhausted world is just desperately trying to rebuild itself from the rubble.
So, as we look back at the cinematic, terrifying, and deeply human story of World War II, what are the essential lessons for humanity that we simply cannot afford to forget? Thank you so much for exploring this history with me today on The Explainer. Keep analyzing the past, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.